All right, so football season is right around the corner. And with that, we're going to start getting weekly press conferences from the coaching staff. And today, we got one from Brent Venables and Ben Arbuckle. So we got to talk about some of the things that Ben Arbuckle said and talked about with the team because the offense was the glaring issue last year for the Sooners. So a lot of fans are asking themselves, where are the improvements going to come? And what about the wide receivers? I think Ben Arbuckle gave a lot of really good answers today. We're not going to be able to cover everything, but I'm going to give you like 3 or 4 points that I really took away from Ben Arbuckle's press conference. So we're going to dive into it. Before we do that, as always, join the discussion. Jump in the comments below. Let me know what your thoughts are. If you guys are new to the channel, make sure you hit that like and you hit that subscribe button. I have been sick for the past week or so been a little hard to make any kind of content. So hopefully, we're making the mend as we hit the football season and we can get stuff out on a regular basis. But let's talk about Ben Arbuckle here and some of the things that he said about the offense and some of the questions that Oklahoma fans have quite frankly had. They're questions that I've had. I know if I have them, you guys have them. And I think the first place that we have to start is the wide receiver room because last year it was just so abysmal. Really didn't give Jackson Arnold a chance to showcase that arm, have weapons to be able to distribute to inside of the offense. But Ben Arbuckle was kind of asked about some of the young guys in that room, who's impressing, all the usual type of questions. And Ben Arbuckle continued to talk about depth at that wide receiver position, which are things that we kind of heard all offseason long. They really love some of the guys that they got out of the portal, guys like Jermichael Carter, Isaiah Satenga. We don't ever talk about Keontez Lewis, but you've also got Giovanni Gibson. But what about some of the younger guys? He always makes mention of Zion Kearney, which, if you guys remember, we talked a lot about him on the recruiting trail. I believe when he came out of high school, this guy was like a top 120 prospect in the country. He was wanted by a lot of folks at like 6'2", 200 pounds. Zion Kearney was a guy that he had kind of explosive speed, maybe not track speed, but explosive speed, and a guy that was able to utilize his leverage and his frame to be able to go up and grab maybe some of those 50-50 balls, but was able to really be able to plant those feet and be able to break away for some deep balls if you needed him to be able to go, take those home runs. And so, Ben Arbuckle got a chance to talk about him, talks about how he's loved his development. Obviously, there's a couple of things that they need to fine tune there. But, when you continue to hear guys like Zion Kearney continue to get mentioned, just like you hear EPL get mentioned with Brent Venables all the time, these are things you have to take away and say, okay, they feel really good about this guy. Although Zion Kearney might not be a starter this year, he's probably going to get a lot of rotational snaps for Oklahoma, and he's probably going to be a guy that as of next year, you could potentially see him as a starter. So really good there to hear that some of these young guys are making a difference and making an impact to Ben Arbuckle. And obviously, he talked about John Mateer and John Mateer's ability to be a leader in that room. And I think that's going to be huge because I think for a lot of these young guys, they had Jackson Arnold, who is right there with them in terms of youth, and having a guy that's maybe a little bit older now, been a starter for a while, he can come in there and help lead those wide receivers to go out there and have a great year. But now he also talked about offensive line. And I think this is also just as equally as important as wide receiver, because just like the wide receiver had a ton of injuries last year, offensive line had a ton of injuries too. And you played with like 8 or 9 different variations of the offensive line. And Ben Arbuckle talked about that. And he said, it was really hard to evaluate the offensive line because, you had so many different iterations of it and everybody was so injured coming in and out of the lineup. But this whole offseason, they focused on developing a chemistry, developing that brotherhood. And now you're starting to see maybe things gel and click a little bit more. I'm still really interested to see what Bill Bedenbaugh's lineups are going to look like. Obviously, whatever we get in week 1 against Southeast Illinois State, I don't think is going to be the starting offensive line that we get the entire season. I think you will get your first offensive line, the first iteration of it, in Michigan. I think that's going to be the one that they continue to run with. I think the Southeast Illinois State game, they're going to give a lot of guys run, see what they've got in game action. But who's going to start at center? Is it Troy Everett or is it Jake Michaela? Do you have a guy like EPL starting over Fabichi Wewu at right guard, or does Hito Zaida lose that spot to EPL? Where's Daniel Akankumi? in the depth chart, because we've heard a lot of things about Daniel Akankumi this offseason. And then, at tackle, right? You had Logan Howland start out there pretty much all year last year. You've got the incoming transfer in Derek Simmons. You've got Jake Taylor. You've got Jacob Sexton. So really competitive room there. But then you've also got Michael Fasusi, the 5-star offensive tackle that everybody wants to see what he's made of, when he's going to get on the field and make an impact. And Ben Arbuckle talked about him and, said, like, he's been impressing. He's made some strides. Again, just like Zion Kearney. I think a couple things you got to tinker with, a couple things you got to tweak, still really young in his career. But Michael Fasusi definitely sounds like a guy that's going to get rotational minutes, at least, for 4 games, and then probably going to get put on the shelf if they can afford that. And by next year, that's going to be a guy that is making an impact, I think, right away, probably going to work his way into the starting rotation next season. So interesting thing to hear there. He did talk about tight ends a little bit, and this has been interesting because it didn't feel like Oklahoma got as good of a tight end haul as maybe they could have gotten, but he did talk a lot about Caden Helms, and, he was like, hey, like, I wasn't here for the injuries. Basically, it was almost like he was alluding to, I'm giving Caden Helms a fresh start, but he talked about how Caden Helms looks good, how he feels really good about him. He talked about Jaren Kanak. Talked about how Jaren Kanak loves to be in the film room, how he's determined. It sounds like Jaren Kanak is going to play a big role in this offense based off kind of how Ben Arbuckle talked about him. It sounds like it's going to be hard to keep Jaren Kanak off the field, and we all know how athletic Jaren Kanak is. So if he can bring some of that athleticism to the offensive side of the ball, I think it just makes that offense a little bit better. And quite honestly, don't know why Oklahoma didn't try Jaren Kanak maybe as a running back or an H-back last year in the offense. You might have found some success there with it. But then lastly, John Hoover over at Sports Illustrated talked about, he asked a question about backup quarterbacks, because everybody wants to talk about John Mateer, which rightfully so. That's your starter coming in, but asked about backup quarterbacks, right? If something was to happen or you had to go down to the backups down the road, like, what does that look like? And obviously, I think a lot of people expect Michael Hawkins to be your second string quarterback going into the season. I'm not as big on that. And the reason why is because I think you need Michael Hawkins to redshirt. And I think, if you could award Michael Hawkins to play in 4 games and then redshirt him to give him an extra year of eligibility, that would be huge for the Sooners. But guys like Whit Neubauer and Jet New, how are they progressing in the offense? Obviously, early in the offseason, we heard a ton about Jet New and how he was starting to impress, and then Whit Neubauer transferred in. So it sounds like the offensive room, or at least the quarterback room, is making a lot of strides. It's an area where Ben Arbuckle obviously is going to feel the most confident in, because that's his position. That's his baby. You've got John Mateer leading the way. It feels like the Oklahoma offense is going to be making a turn. Now, again, a lot of this, yes, it is preseason talk. It's preseason hype. Talking season is almost over. But if you're an Oklahoma fan, I feel like throughout this press conference, we got some questions addressed. You may feel a little bit better about where things stand. And, Southeast Illinois State, it's right around the corner. It's here at the end of August. I think we're like 30, 31 days away. So I'm excited. Jump in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think. If you guys got a chance to watch Ben Arbuckle's press conference, let me know some of the takeaways that you guys got from there. If you guys are new to the channel, make sure you guys hit that like and hit that subscribe button. We'll see y'all next time.